Once upon a time, in a small village, there lived a man named Edward and his wife, Clara. Edward was a hard-working farmer who dreamed of having a son to carry on his name. But fate had different plans. Clara gave birth to 5 daughters, each as beautiful and kind as the other. Edward was disappointed every time. One day, Clara found out she was pregnant again. When she told Edward, his face darkened and he said sternly,
"If this baby is another girl, I will leave her in the street. I will not raise another daughter."
Clara's heart broke. She loved all her children dearly and prayed for the safety of her unborn child. Months passed and the time came for Clara to give birth. It was a cold winter night when her cries filled the small house. Finally, the baby was born, a girl. Tears streamed down Clara's face as she held her newborn daughter. She knew what would happen. The next morning, as the baby slept peacefully, Edward took her in his arms and walked out of the house. Clara sobbed, begging him not to do this, but he didn't listen. He carried the tiny girl to a lonely street at the edge of the village and left her there. The next day, guilt gnawed at Edward. He decided to check if someone had taken the baby. To his shock, she was still there, wrapped in the same thin cloth, her tiny hands curled into fists. He sighed and walked away. Day after day he returned, expecting to find her gone, but each time she was still there. The baby grew weaker, her cries softer. Meanwhile, every night, he returned home to see Clara weeping, her heart shattered. On the 7th day, Edward stood before the helpless infant. She was still alive, but barely. He felt something strange inside him, guilt, regret, and an unfamiliar warmth. With a deep sigh, he picked up the baby and carried her home. Clara gasped when she saw him enter with their daughter. Without a word, she took the baby from his arms and held her close.
"Thank you,"
she whispered, tears running down her face. Edward said nothing, but deep inside, something had changed. A year later, Clara became pregnant again, and this time she gave birth to a boy. Edward was overjoyed. He named him William and held him with pride. He loved his son dearly, but something surprising happened. He also grew to love his youngest daughter, whom they named Evelyn. Years passed, and the children grew up. One by one, the daughters got married and moved away. Even William left to build a life of his own. But Evelyn stayed. She had become a strong, intelligent woman, a dedicated teacher who touched the hearts of her students. She had never married, for she had devoted her life to caring for her aging father. Edward had grown old and weak. His health declined, and he needed constant care. It was Evelyn who stayed by his side, feeding him, helping him walk, and holding his hand through every painful night. Despite everything, she never reminded him of what he had done. She loved him as a daughter should. One day, as she stood before her students in class, a young girl raised her hand.
"Miss Evelyn, you are so beautiful, like so kind. Why haven't you married?"
The classroom fell silent. Evelyn smiled softly and sat on the edge of her desk.
"Let me tell you a story,"
she said. She told them everything. The father who had abandoned his newborn daughter, the 7 nights she lay alone, and the man who had finally carried her home. She spoke of her mother's love, her siblings' departures, and the lonely old man who now depended on the very child he had once cast away. When she finished, there was silence. Some students had tears in their eyes. One boy finally whispered,
"Miss Evelyn, that baby was you, wasn't it?"
Evelyn nodded, her eyes shining with unshed tears.
"Yes, it was me. And now my father is old and frail, and I am the only one left to care for him. That is why I have not married."
The students sat quietly, moved by the story. Finally, the same young girl spoke.
"You are an angel, Miss Evelyn. Your father is lucky to have you."
Evelyn smiled.
"No, my dear, I am the lucky one. For I have learned that true love is forgiveness, and real strength is kindness."
That evening, as she returned home, she found her father asleep in his chair. His breathing was slow but steady. She knelt beside him, adjusting his blanket. As she touched his frail hand, his eyes opened slightly, and for the first time in years, he whispered,
"Forgive me, Evelyn."
Tears welled in her eyes. She squeezed his hand gently.
I forgave you long ago, Father. Sleep now. I am here.
And as Edward drifted into a peaceful sleep, Evelyn sat beside him, knowing that no matter what had happened in the past, love had found a way to heal them both. The following days were quiet. Edward's health deteriorated further, and Evelyn barely left his side. She read to him, told him stories from her classroom, and reminded him of the good times they had shared. One evening, as the sun set, Edward took his last breath with Evelyn holding his hand. A tear slid down her cheek, but she smiled through the sorrow. She had done her duty as a daughter, and she had given him the love he once denied her. At his funeral, people spoke of Edward as a man who had learned the value of love too late. But Evelyn held no bitterness in her heart. She knew that love, in the end, had changed him. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this story with someone who needs to hear it.